With Lightfall being less than 48 hours away, pretty much at this point, I just wanted to go over some of the Warlock exotics that I'm really excited to use with Strand. Uh, First off, just a disclaimer, this isn't to say what is or isn't going to be the most meta pick for Strand next season. That's still kind of to be determined, but these are just couple of exotics that I think are going to work particularly well with Strand, at least until we know more about how the subclass works. So first off, if you're looking for like a TLDR, I made a tier list here, and this kind of just generally places the exotics to where I think they'll be standing. We have things at the very bottom like Astrocide Verse or Getaway Artists, things that work specifically with other subclasses that will probably, like Strong, probably have zero interaction with Strand at all. And then as we go up, we have things that like kind of work, technically work, but maybe don't work as well as some of like the more general options, or even things that will work really specifically with what Strand has to offer. And then obviously at the very top we have like the things that I think are going to work really, really well, just based on what we've seen so far. I'll go one by one through everything from great potential to the technically works section here, but I'm not going to cover anything that doesn't work since most of those are pretty obvious. The only one that I'll include right now is Claws of Ahamkara. All it does is give you an extra melee charge, but given that the Strand melee already has 3 charges, it's kind of unlikely that this will do anything. And if it gives you a 4th charge, it's still probably not going to be nearly as useful as something that just gives you more melee regen anyway. Before we get into the first exotics, I just want to go over some of the Broodweaver basic abilities, just to give some context on why I think some of these exotics are really good. So first up, we have the Broodweaver Melee, Arcane Needle, which you have 3 charges of. It's a ranged melee, and it's going to unravel enemies on impact, which is going to be an effect kind of like Volatile. So you apply this, and then you hit an enemy with weapon damage or anything else, and it'll make them explode, and it'll also apply this unravel to nearby enemies when you explode them. Next up, we've got the first aspect, Weaver's Call. So on Riftcast, you'll spawn 3 Threadling Eggs, which will turn into your Threadling Summons. Additionally, on Warlock, when you spawn any of these Threadling Summons, let's say you spawn 4 and it only takes like 2 to kill an enemy, well, those remaining 2 will actually come back and perch on you. So in addition to spawning 3 Threadling Eggs, this will take any of the Threadlings that are currently perched on you and turn them into Threadling Eggs as well. Next up is the other aspect, Mindspun Invocation. So this is kind of similar to some of the existing aspects for other subclasses in that it will enhance all of the Strand grenades that you have access to on release. So first up with the Grapple Grenade, whenever you do your Grapple melee, so whenever you grapple, you'll actually have a follow-up melee attack with the Grapple. So whenever you use that Grapple melee, you'll spawn 3 Threadling Eggs, so essentially summoning 3 more Threadlings. Then you've got the Threadling Grenade, which this aspect will give you the ability to consume that to get a full complement of Perch Threadlings, so giving you whatever the maximum number of Perch Threadlings you can have is. I think this might be good. Let's say you get like a max of 6, then if you consume this and use your Rift, then you're spawning 9 Threadlings total, so very easily can you start swarming these Threadlings at enemies. Then you've got the Shackle Grenade, which you can also consume, and this will give you kind of a buff. And that's what's shown in the clip here. And whenever you get a kill, you'll end up suspending enemies, which could be pretty good. But it seems like Warlock is more about spawning tons of these Threadlings, so I'm probably either going to go with the Grapple or Threadling Grenade with this aspect. Last but not least, we've got the Super Needle Storm, which looks pretty awesome. Pretty excited for this one. It's like a big one-and-done burst damage super, but then after you do the damage, it'll reweave itself into an army of Threadlings. So just another way to spawn tons of Threadlings and overwhelm your enemies with that, in addition to doing, hopefully, a decent chunk of damage. Alright, so with abilities out of the way, let's start talking exotics. The first one up we have is called Swarmers. This is the new exotic that is going to be releasing with Lightfall. These look pretty cool. So basically, every time you destroy a Tangle, you're going to create a bunch of Threadlings, which is cool because you're already creating a bunch of Threadlings. But how do you create Tangles? So according to Bungie's Inside Strand blog post, It just says any enemy defeated that is affected by Strand will unravel them and create a tangle. So this sounds like any enemy you hit with your grapple melee, with any of your grenades, with any of your threadlings, with your super. All of these should create tangles. Now, I'm guessing there's going to be some sort of internal cooldown, so you're not just creating a tangle for every enemy you defeat that's affected by Strand, but sounds like you'll have these up pretty often, and it's a cool way for you to create some threadlings without really relying on like the cooldown of your abilities. Next up, we've got the Stag. So the Stag has three main functionalities. So whenever you cast a rift and you stand inside of it, you and allies will get a damage resist buff. On dying, you'll create a rift, and whenever you are critically damaged, you will get a lot of rift regen. So I think this is pretty solid. Obviously, on rift cast, you're going to be spawning a bunch of your threadlings. With the resilience changes, with enemies getting a lot tankier and doing more damage, you're going to be at critical damage a lot more. So if you're playing far back, you like to spam your rift. You can use this to buff your allies, buff yourself, keep yourself alive, while also spawning a bunch of threadlings. So probably a decent pick. Now on to Verity's Brow. This one's really interesting. So basically getting elemental kills that match your subclass will give you a buff to your grenade damage, as well as your grenade regen. Talking about Strand grenades, there are three. Obviously, there's the grapple, which has the follow-up melee, so the damage from that might actually apply to the follow-up melee, which I think might be kind of interesting. There's also the threadling grenade, which may not really work with Verities. It's kind of hard to say whether or not the threadlings are going to count as grenade damage necessarily. And then you have the suspend grenade, like the Bola. This looks like it's more like a CC option than it is really like a damage thing. So again, I don't really know if the damage buff from death throws is going to actually be useful here. Regardless, though, this also does provide a stacking buff to your regen as well. So this might be a pretty good option. Honestly, I'm really interested to see how this plays out with the grapple. The other buff on Verity's Brow is that when you have death throws and you use your grenade, nearby allies will also get their grenade regen. And given how a lot of people are looking forward to the grapple ability in Lightfall, I think that your allies will appreciate being able to grapple a lot more because of you. Next up is Vesper of Radius. This one's pretty interesting. This exotic honestly is not too popular, but with Strand it has some synergy. So when you cast a rift, you'll release an arc shockwave around you to deal some damage, and then you will obviously follow up with the threadlings that you spawn. But also, more importantly, you'll get bonus rift energy when you're surrounded by enemies. So if you like to play really aggressive like I do, you're going to be casting rift more often, buffing your allies, creating more threadlings. That's about it. Next up is Winter's Guile, which is also pretty interesting and underused. So getting powered or unpowered melee kills will give you a stacking buff that allows you to do more damage with those powered or unpowered melees. It was recently buffed to work with glaives, but also nerfed in that the amount of bonus damage you get has gone down quite considerably. Even so, I think this is kind of interesting. This is the first time that Warlock's gotten a melee with multiple charges, so now it's a little bit easier to manage the short timer that the Winter's Guile buff has. I personally like this. I don't think it's going to be the most meta, most amazing thing, but at least going through the Legendary campaign or some of the Neomuna patrol areas, I think this will be pretty interesting. Next up is Felwinters, which is also a pretty slept-on exotic in my opinion. So powered melees or finishers will create a AoE around the target that you kill, blinding enemies and debuffing them, and the debuff is pretty considerable. It's like 30% if you use a finisher, so it's almost like the Void Weekend. Again, you've got that ranged melee. Depending on the amount of damage it does, this will be pretty solid. This is a good way to, again, play really aggressive and not really be punished, since the enemies around the target will be blinded, debuffed, etc. Next is Necrotic Grip. I'm really excited for Necrotic Grip. So Necrotic Grip has been in the game for about 2 years now, and while it's pretty popular with players, it hasn't really been that useful in a lot of like harder content. And that's kind of because with existing subclasses, something like Solar, where you're trying to get kills with Scorch or Ignitions to proc your fragments, your aspects, Necrotic Grip's poison effect that you get for enemy like slapping enemies will kind of rob that with you with killing enemies to the poison. But now there's nothing in the Strand subclass that innately requires you to get the kill with your ability, right? So now you can throw out a melee, your ranged melee with multiple stacks, so you can like throw out a couple at once, apply that poison effect. Now you've applied Unravel to the enemies because of the melee's ability. You're poisoning them over time, and then there's a chance that you kill them with the poison, which will spread the poison more, but also have a chance on creating a tangle. So I think there's a lot of synergy here. Again, Necrotic Grips is popular, but I think this is the first time that it's really, really going to be useful on a subclass, at least in like the harder content. Mantle of Battle Harmony. This exotic, I would say, is also pretty slept on. So getting kills with a weapon that matches your current subclass, so Strand weapons if you're on Strand, will give you a bonus to your super energy regen. And then while your super is full, instead of getting that bonus super energy regen, you'll get I think it's a 25% damage bonus to all like Strand weapon damage, right? So there are two ways you can use Mantle of Battle Harmony. You can either basically keep getting kills and cast your super whenever it's up, or hold on to it and do that bonus damage. If you're going to kill a boss, you can take out your Strand heavy weapon, do a bunch of damage, and once you're out of ammo, then you cast your super. Just trying to get the most out of this exotic. I don't see really much specific synergy here, but I do think this is a really solid pick. So definitely try this out if you get some cool Strand weapons. Aeon Soul. All right, now we're getting into some of the, I would say, not necessarily less viable, but less synergistic exotic options. Aeon Soul has a couple of different effects, but the main one we're going to be talking about here is probably either the energy regen you get for stunning a champion, or the finisher effect you'll get for finishing a boss or mini boss. You'll get a heavy ammo, or an elite, you'll get a special ammo for your entire fire team. Both of these things are not things that really synergize with Strand necessarily, but they are good things. They buff your allies, really more so than they buff yourself. I don't see them being a huge pick in like the Legend campaign, but going into Day 1 raid, going into some Nightfalls when people are still kind of low level, these are a decent pick. Now we got Eye of Another World. Again, not a super specific in that it synergizes with Strand, but a solid pick because it gives you a big boost to the regen of your grenade, your melee, and your rift. These are all things that you're going to want to spam if you want to create as many threadlings as possible. And also gives you a small benefit to the airborne effectiveness of all weapons. I know a lot of people are going to want to run the grapple ability instead of one of the other grenades. So if this is really for you, try out Eye of Another World. Even if you're trying like a threadling build with some of the threadling grenades, I would say this is still probably a decent pick. Next is Karnstein Armlets. To be honest, this is not my favorite exotic. Melee kills will give you a large amount of health and then restore health for a little bit after that. This now works with glaives, so if you're a big glaive fan, maybe this is the exotic pick for you. I typically don't really like using this exotic just because there are other sources of getting HP back in the game. You can run an unrelenting weapon. There might be some mods that give you healing. This is just not that interesting to me. I would rather be using something like Eye of Another World, Vesper of Radius, just anything that is helping me cast my abilities a lot faster. But again, if you really want to lean into glaives, if you really want to lean into a melee build, this might be the one for you. And that brings us to Ophidian Aspect. So Ophidian Aspect gives you a bonus to weapon reload, bonus to weapon handling. It says it gives you a melee range extension, but I think that really only applies to like your unpowered melee on Strand. This is kind of a relic from when all melees were pretty much just like slaps. So I don't think you're going to get bonus range on the Strand melee. It does also give you a benefit to airborne effectiveness of all weapons, which, again, if you're running grapple, that might be useful for you. Basically, if you like snappy reloads, snappy handling, then pick this. Otherwise, I don't really see much reason to use this. On to Transversive Steps. I know a lot of people like this exotic. It's not my personal favorite. Gives you a boost to sprint speed, so run a little bit faster, and will automatically reload whatever weapon you have out while you're running. It's helpful if you want to get through content a little bit faster, like beat that playlist strike a little bit faster. If you're running through the campaign multiple times and you want to do it as fast as possible, it's helpful. If you have a gun with kind of an unwieldy reload, can be helpful. But outside of that, I don't really see much reason to use this. Boots of the Assembler. Now this one's kind of interesting. So standing in a healing rift will create noble seekers that seek out allies that are not in the rift and heal them. An empowering rift will do the same, but granting a bonus to damage instead of healing. Each time one of these noble seekers hits one of your allies, your rift will get extended. We talked about extended rifts versus bonus rift energy. Probably not as good as something like Eye of Another World or Vesper of Radius. This does work pretty well with Lumina. If you have Lumina equipped, then your noble seekers will give both the healing and the damage buff, so that can be kind of useful here. Again, AE if you want to use Lumina in the air with a grapple. I've heard that this is a bugged exotic, and your noble seekers will always kind of shoot towards the nearest ally instead of like all of the allies around you. So if this bug interaction gets fixed, it might be a little bit better. But honestly, I see this as something that's a little bit better on like solar subclasses. Not much synergy with Strand here. Now we're getting to like some really meme tier exotics. Chromatic Fire. Not a really popular exotic, so getting precision final blows with a kinetic weapon will give you an explosion in the element of your subclass, so a Strand explosion. It's going to be kind of similar to the effects of Dragonfly, which is also kind of a perk that people don't really like to use. Can't remember the last time I saw someone bring this into any content, like playlist strikes or Grandmasters or anything, so use this if you like the fashion, if you really like Dragonfly and you want that effect, but other than that, like, avoid this at all costs. Apotheosis Veil. So this one is another one that people really don't like, although I kind of see like an interesting combo happening with this one. So this gives you all of your health back, all of your melee grenade and rift energy back whenever you cast your super, and then nearby allies will get their class abilities faster. That class ability regen for allies is probably the best part of this. Though with Strand Warlock, you could probably do something like consume your grenade with the aspect, your threadling grenade to get a bunch of threadlings, cast your rift to spawn all of them, cast your super, and then consume your grenade and then spam your rift again. You will create a ton of threadlings this way, but that is completely limited by your super cooldown. So unless you're casting your super like every 2 minutes, it's worthless, and then even then, like, I can't really see it being that good. Lunafaction Boots. Okay, so when you cast a rift, you'll get an additional like boost to your reload speed, and this applies to all allies that stand in your rifts while you have these equipped. Empowering rifts will also give you a little bit of bonus range on your weapons. These are decent exotic boots, but it really only applies in like boss DPS settings where you really have a bunch of heavy weapons that are slow that you want to reload a lot faster. You can use these in the Legend campaign, things like that, but again, you're probably going to see a better benefit out of Eye of Another World, anything that's going to help your ability regen or give you a boost to damage of some kind. Nezarec Sin also feels kind of memey. So void damage kills will give you ability energy recharge rate. That applies to your melee, your grenade, your rift, and I think your super. So a lot of people run this with void. Makes more sense because you have void abilities, but you can still apply the ability recharge rate effects if you use a void weapon. There is a new void LMG that I know a couple of people have their eyes on that can apply weaken and volatile. If you want to run a void weapon, you really want to, and you really want to run Strand, you might want to give this a shot, but again, I don't think it's really worth looking at versus some of the newer exotics. Promethium Spur. Okay, this is where we get into the really kind of shit tier exotics. All right, so the Daybreak effect is completely not present here. It requires you to be on Solar subclass, but while you're inside of a rift, Solar final blows with weapons will give you rift energy. That's good because it helps you cast rift more often. However, the other effect of these boots is that when your rift energy is full, final blows will consume your rift and create a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. The main reason that sucks is because I don't think the aspect that creates threadlings on rift cast is going to apply whenever that is when that is procced, right? So it's taking your Rift energy. It's not actually casting Threadlings for you. So I just would avoid this until maybe we get some new aspects on Strand. Sanguine Alchemy, also kind of down there in terms of tier. Weapon kills in a rift will pause the rift's countdown, extending the duration. Further kills further extend the rift. So we talked about how longer rifts do not really benefit you. It's more that you want to be casting rift more often, so this doesn't really do much for you. Dawn Chorus is another like meme tier exotic in terms of like Strand synergy. Daybreak obviously is not accessible on Strand. Your Scorch effects will deal more damage, and you get melee energy while your Scorch is damaging enemies. You can still apply these two if you use an incandescent weapon. Mina Multi-Tool is pretty popular, so if you're burning them with incandescent, you're burning them for more damage, you're getting melee energy back, but outside that, this is pretty niche pick, I would say. Secant Filaments, so you will not get the effect of Devour when casting an Empowering Rift. That only happens when you're on a Void subclass. However, you will get the effect that your weapon damage will apply Overload, the secondary effect. However, next season, a lot of subclasses are getting the ability to stun champions just with the subclass effects themselves and not have to rely on like artifact mods anymore. So these are kind of getting worse in general, even on Void, but even more so, I would just say there's really no reason to run these on the Strand versus anything else. And on to our final, Rain of Fire. This actually is kind of saving a best for last kind of situation. Air dodge reloads all of your weapons. This is not accessible. That's a solar-only thing. However, if you have a fusion rifle or a linear fusion, these final blows with these two weapons will still make you radiant. A lot of people are talking about this because if you have a chill clip fusion rifle, for example, that will be able to stun Overload and barrier champions, Overload and unstoppable champions from the get-go. But if you become Radiant via these boots, you can also stun barrier champions because that is the effect of Radiant, according to next season. AE as well, if you want to be in the air. It's useful if you really care about stunning champions, but outside of that, again, not much reason to use something like this. And that brings us to the end of the video. Sorry, that went a little bit longer than I expected, but I just wanted to go through and really explain why I thought each of these picks was worth or not worth using. Either way, I'm pretty excited to try out a lot of new builds come Lightfall with the mod changes and stuff like that. I'm going to try to make a video on a lot of the build crafting changes that are coming before Lightfall is coming out, but obviously now that's like in 2 days, so I don't have much time. Either way, when Lightfall does drop, I'll be making a lot of videos on different builds and stuff and really going into the mods and different aspects and fragments, so be on the lookout for that. And just let me know what you thought about the video. Are you going to try out any of these after watching this? Was I super wrong, or any of these look like particularly shit options and you completely disagree? Just let me know in the comments. Thanks. I'll see you soon.